Sam Altman is the president of Y Combinator. He's been the president for about 2.5 years. That's what he's most known for, but I think more impressively, over the last decade, he's become probably the consigliere for more founders than anybody else in Silicon Valley. So hopefully Sam will share lots of those thoughts with us. Come on stage. So you dropped out of Stanford when you were 19 to found a company, and you joined the first batch of Y Combinator. Today, so like 10 years later, what's the vision of Y Combinator? What do you want it to be?
That we can answer pretty simply. We want to be the organization that enables the most innovation in the world. Maybe today that's Google. Hope in the not too distant future that's Y Combinator. There's that famous, I think it was first a Disney quote about we make more money so that we can make more movies, and we make more money so that we can enable more technology. And if we don't think we're going to make money on something, but we think it's really important, we're still happy to do it. So YC research is something that we do. We also fund nonprofits. But I think more innovation is really critical to a good future. I think if we don't get economic growth back in this country, we're going to be in a very bad place. And I think if we don't get the rate of innovation increased, we're not going to get economic growth back. So that's our mission.
And so, talk about a couple of the programs that you've added to the core of Y Combinator since you took over.
Sure. So one thing that we started doing is funding sort of hard science companies. Actually, the very first one we funded, Cruise, was recently acquired by GM, a self-driving car company. We funded lots more. Nuclear energy companies, a lot of biotech companies, space companies, aircraft companies. And we realized that these companies came out of YC looking pretty good, but needed gigantic amounts of capital, and that existing investors generally wouldn't fund them. And so one thing we did was start funding companies like this. Another thing that we did was raise a growth fund to let us continue to support these sorts of companies and others that come out of our portfolio. We started something called the YC Fellowship. The goal there is someday we want to figure out how to touch 10,000 companies a year. We've got a ways to go to get there, but we needed a program to massively scale up our reach, because our core program just isn't big enough today. And we want to be able to reach 10,000 companies around the globe each year. And so we started this new program that's scaling very rapidly. It's a very early stage light touch program. And we started YC Research, which is a research group, and we want to fund important technology that we don't think makes sense for whatever reason in a for-profit startup. Things like AI or basic income research is something we're doing, education research. I think you'll see us do some synthetic biology research. But when there are things that are important to the future of the world that don't fit in a for-profit startup, we still want those to sort of be in our orbit.
What are the key lessons? I mean, about 25% of this audience actually went through Y Combinator.
Yeah, a lot of alumni here.
For those who didn't, what are the key 2 or 3 lessons you'd like to impact to startups like during that 12 weeks?
The motto of YC is, it started off as make something people want. We haven't updated it, but we should at some point, because we changed the advice to be make something people love. And you kind of have 2 choices when you start off as a startup. You can either make something that a small number of users really love, or that a lot of users really like. And you'd obviously like to start with something that a lot of users really love, but those get taken by the big companies. And the thing that our most successful companies do is, even if they start with a small number of users, they have very intense love for the product. They're incredible evangelists. They go around saying, oh, I can't believe how great Stripe is, you've got to start using it. Or, oh, I stayed on Airbnb, it was the best experience I've ever had traveling, you've got to use it. And we looked back at our portfolio once, and we realized that all of our best companies had this in common, full stop. They all had some initial users that really loved what they built. And this is the thing that we try to get you to figure out during Y Combinator. Build a product that a small number of users really love, and then let's work together to figure out how to grow it. And growth is really important, because A, it shows that people do actually love your product, as long as it's real growth with actually retained users and not people that churn off all the time. But also, it gets to the second lesson we try to teach during Y Combinator, which is that momentum is everything in a startup. If you ever take your foot off the gas and lose momentum, it is incredibly difficult to recover from that. And startups that keep doing well, and there's new and exciting challenges every week or every month, and startups that keep growing, and startups that win keep winning, and startups that lose keep losing. And startups are sort of this nearly impossible task, and you basically live and survive off your own momentum. And so we really try to help startups get that and keep that during Y Combinator.
So one of the virtues of funding 200 plus companies a year times multiple years is you see a lot of data and you see a lot of good and bad examples. What do you think the most common mistakes people make as they evolve from a seed stage company to a Series A type of company?
Wow, that is a good question, and there's way more than 21 minutes worth of answer to that. So I will just pick a few topics and talk about those that I think are mistakes that people don't talk about enough. So I think when you're sort of a seed Series A company, you spend a huge amount of effort recruiting, but almost no effort retaining talent. And you pay a price for that debt later. But as you scale past that, retaining talent becomes, I think, as important as recruiting. And it's something that founders don't feel as obviously strong that they need to do. They do once they lose half their team. But initially, the desire is to just spend all the effort on recruiting. And that is right at the beginning. But if you don't shift to viewing retaining talent as much of your job as recruiting talent, you eventually have some level of a disaster on your hands. And so the things that you have to do to retain talent are, none of them are particularly difficult or insightful. They just take a lot of time and you have to commit to them. So, and if you, Zuckerberg once said when he spoke at YC that he'd only hire people that he'd report to if the roles were reversed. And if you're hiring people that are that good, which you should be doing, they have as many opportunities as you do. So if you're thinking about, oh, what am I going to do after this company? Or, am I in the best role I could be in? They're thinking about the same thing. And so if you don't make the role good enough that you yourself would stay in it, then you have a hard time retaining your best people for a long period of time. So the things I think that people need to start doing as they shift from the seed Series A to later than that to retain talent, one, the thing that your best 5 or 10 people crave the most is time with you and time with the CEO. And that is something that as people get busier, they spend less and less time on. I think some of the very best CEOs in our portfolio, every month, they will take out for a one-on-one dinner or drinks or something, each of their best 10 people. Every month. And this is a huge time commitment. I mean, if you think about, you get 30 dinner slots in a month, this is like a really big thing to do. And I think that actually works because that is the thing that these people really crave and that they really start to lose. And they want you to ask them what you think they should be doing and listen to them and have a personal connection. That's super important. I think another thing is giving people new tasks. One of the fun things about being CEO is that even if you have a little bit of ADD, that's okay because you get to do new things all the time. It's tempting to slot VPs into these sort of like functional roles they get really good at and then not move them around or not give them more and more responsibility. So I think if you stop giving people more responsibility, they will eventually leave. If they get to take on new tasks every year or additional tasks every year, they're happier. And then the last thing is around comp. I think most founders are very bad about proactively re-upping to the level that they should, their top 5 or 10 lieutenants. But this is one transition that many of our companies have failed to make at some point or other, is how important it is to retain talent. Another thing is that people get delegation wrong one way or the other. So every founder knows that as you scale the company, you need to delegate. Everyone hears that and they do it, but they either do way too much or way too little. And it's actually quite difficult to do it the right balance. So either you don't delegate enough, and that usually happens because you get it wrong once, and then you get so burned you say you'll never do that again. And you sort of have to trust that even though you have this one disastrous VP, delegation itself is a good idea and will work, and don't get burned from one experience. But most of our founders get really burned once early on, and then it takes them a long time to trust that it can work again. And the other thing that you see founders get wrong is they delegate the most important thing. Their board member tells them, hey, you got to delegate, you need these 5 VPs for these 5 areas. And probably, whatever is the area that you think is most important to the business and you enjoy the most, you shouldn't hire the VP in that area. You should do it yourself. And so if you're a product person and you really love product, don't hire a VP of product. Keep doing that. Because if you hire a VP of product, you will have never any conflict because you both want the same thing. And you won't like the way they do it. They won't like the way you're interfering with them, whatever. Or if what you really love is finance, which some of our CEOs do, don't hire a CFO. Do it yourself and hire a controller. So whatever you think the critical piece of the business is, the one or maybe 2 most critical pieces, hold on to those yourself. That will also make you better about delegating everything else so that you can focus on what you really want to focus on. Maybe we should move on to the next.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things you also get asked a lot of advice on is financing.
Yeah.
As all your companies are going through different stages. Any macro pieces of advice on how to do financing well?
Yeah, none of this is rocket science, but I think when people get into trouble is when they overextend themselves somehow. So they take the absolute highest price they can get, forgetting that they have to be able to beat that in the next round, or they ramp burn up to the maximum possible number they could to sort of keep 9 or 12 months of runway. And I think the margin of safety is this well-understood investment concept, and everyone understands that except startup CEOs when they're raising venture rounds, and where people are inclined to really push it to the limit one way or the other. And our general advice is don't push it to the limit. Don't take an investor that is going to be difficult to work with, that beats your highest offer by 3% or 10% or whatever from somebody else. Don't have a plan where you're going to run out of money 3 months before you start your next fundraising process. And this sounds like a simple thing, but in practice, again and again, we see our founders just care about the headline number and nothing else. And I think like if you have very competitive people that have been competing their whole life and they had a quantitative metric to compete on, and they get one again, they're going to compete again. And so, well, like it's very hard to compare terms or quality of investor, but it's quite simple to compare top line pre-money valuation. And so people like to optimize for that. But I think fundraising does not have to be hard. If you build a company that is really great, and if you build it in such a way that you are not dependent on gigantic amounts of outside capital to survive, and if you don't push the limits of every round, I don't think it has to be that hard.
So on the soft side of comparing investors, how do you advise founders, like given that it is hard to compare investors and lots of people in this room will be raising more capital and have to make those decisions, how do they select?
Yeah, another thing that I always think is funny is that a founder will make 12 reference calls before hiring a VP of sales and 0 to 2 before adding a new board member. And the one obvious takeaway is that you should treat bringing on a new investor with at least as much care and thought as you would treat hiring a VP. And calling the CEO, calling the off-list CEOs that a venture firm has worked with when the company hasn't worked out, or it has, but the venture firm didn't recommend you talk to that CEO. I think this is hugely important. And we have many times seen founders walk away from a deal they thought they were going to take after doing references. So I think that's the single most important thing. And the other heavily related thing is just spend a lot of time together. This is like, you can at least fire a VP. It's extremely difficult to fire an investor. And so I would spend many, many hours together in person getting to know each other before adding someone to my board and my cap table. Again, this is not rocket science, but it is surprising how often people don't do this in the heat of the moment.
Sure. Let's switch topics to AI.
Yeah.
Which is both a personal interest of yours and now an interest of Y Combinator. Why are you so interested in AI? Why is Y Combinator so interested in AI?
Well, I think why I'm interested in it and why Y Combinator is interested in it and why everybody else is so interested in it is that it is at a minimum the next computing platform, and the upcoming computing platform is always where the great investments come. And it is probably sort of not just the next technology, but the next life form to some degree. And it may take 10 years, it may take 100 years. I doubt it takes more than 100 years. But that is a blink of an eye in human history. And so we get lost in this debate about exactly how far away AI is. But what we don't say is we all agree it's coming. And that's a ridiculous thing that like we can all sit around seriously and agree so strongly. We agree that we instead just talk about time frame. But again, these time frames, they don't matter. They're not that long in the grand scheme. It's going to come, and we are basically going to create, to whatever degree, the children of humanity. And we're going to create sort of a new life form. And this is sort of a very exciting thing to spend time on.
You also, are well aware of Elon's concerns about AI that he's expressed publicly. I think you share some of those. Want to talk about that?
Look, it's AI can be the best or the worst thing ever to happen to humanity, and we're working really hard to make sure it's the best. But I'd be lying if I said I was 100% confident in our plan, because if you create something that is sort of more powerful than the creator, it's difficult to be 100% sure that we can control it, or that it will do what we want, or that we can even understand what it will do. So I'm super optimistic in general, and I'm pretty optimistic. I'm very optimistic about AI specifically. I think the way to think about it is, the neocortex is in service of the limbic system. Individual humans are very powerful, but the collective will of all humans is more powerful than any single human. So even if one human is a bad actor or tries to misuse his or her resources or technology, whatever, we as a collective stop that. And my hope with AI is that AI is widely distributed among humanity. We have these agents that are sort of in service of our neocortex in the way that our neocortex is in service of our limbic system. We have these things trying to make us happy, do what we want. And although any individual could misuse his or her AI, the collective of all of us, we all just get a lot better. I think there will be short-term challenges for sure, as we see, the AI revolution will be on the order of the agricultural revolution and the industrial revolution in terms of how much it changes what humans do every day. But I'm very confident that we'll find new things to do. I think human demand is limitless and just as difficult as it would have been to predict software at the time of the industrial revolution. I don't know what to predict will come next, but I'm confident there'll be something there. I think it'll be a little rocky to get there, so we're also doing a basic income experiment at YC to see if we can help ease that transition. But longer term, I think you can see this world where for some number of years, GDP grows like 100% a year around the world, and we get to this really awesome place. So I'm excited about it, but it's clearly makes a lot of people, including me, lose some amount of sleep.
Cool. Let's take some questions from the audience. If you have a question, there's microphones circulating. Just raise your hand. First question. There we go.
I just wanted to make you run with that microphone. It struck me as a potential disconnect between things that you think would take 100 years and things that you invest in. Can you comment on that?
I'm actually pretty happy to invest in things that I think will take 100 years. I think the number one advantage that you can have as an investor is to have a longer time horizon than everybody else and be willing to expose yourself to more illiquidity and more volatility than everybody else. So, if I invest in something and my kids get the shares, I'm perfectly fine with that. I don't think enough people do enough of that. I think we should still be investing in things that might take 100 years.
So YC does like research and AI. So is the model like a university, or is it like DARPA, or is it like so what's sort of the overarching model on top of YC?
I sort of object to the need for an analogy because I think we're building something fundamentally new. I think if you had to pick one, a university is the right analogy. But we haven't seen a fundamentally new entity structure in a while, and we'd like to figure out what that might look like. And so I don't know yet what it is because I think we're still in the first decade of it'll probably take 50 years to really figure this out. But what we want to be is this sort of like platform on which a large percentage of the innovation in the world happens. We don't know what forms that's going to look like yet. We don't know exactly what our organization is going to look like. But that's the thing that we want to do, and we want to build the infrastructure to support that. And what that looks like, whether it's closer to a university or closer to a venture firm or closer to DARPA, we don't know yet. We're still writing that story.
So when you guys do selection of the YC classes, we've talked a lot about the ideas that you guys are interested in seeing innovation with AI and other areas, but ultimately you're choosing people. So just maybe tell us a little bit about how you select for the people ultimately who will drive the kinds of innovation you're looking for.
So one of the things about YC that people may not know is that we make our decisions in 10 minutes. Because of the scale at which we're trying to operate and the number of companies we try to see every year, we only get 10 minutes with each company. And at first glance, you would say, there's no way to make better than random decisions in 10 minutes. And then you think about it a little more, and you say, okay, you can do better than random, but not that well. And that's what I would have said. But it turns out that in 10 minutes, if the only question you're trying to answer is, does this person have the potential to be the next Mark Zuckerberg? Not are they definitely going to be, not should we put millions of dollars into this, but does this person have some seed of what it takes to be the next Mark Zuckerberg? You can answer that question in 10 minutes. Not with 100% accuracy, obviously, but good enough that our business model works. And what we're looking for, the obvious thing is intelligence. That's really easy. You can tell that really quickly. Much less than 10 minutes usually. The hardest trait that we're looking for is determination. And that when we're really wrong one way or the other on a founder, it's because we were miscalibrated on how determined that founder seemed. And then there are a few other topics in the middle that we look at. Clarity of vision, ability, communication skills, sort of non-obvious brilliance of the idea we look at very hard. These are ones that you can't always be right on, but you can usually get quite a lot of data. And unlike determination, they're not quite as difficult to figure out, but not as easy as intelligence. And one of the surprising things about YC is that not only is it possible to figure this out, but you can train new YC partners to figure this out in a year or 2 years. So it is not an incredibly difficult skill, which means that think how much better the world could get in general at identifying talent.
Well, the amazing thing, at least last time you shared data with us, which is you haven't actually missed anybody. Like there's not a single person who's applied that's created $1 billion company in 10 years that you rejected.
I'm sure at this point we've already rejected the person that will go on to create that just because we've scaled up so much. But we have not missed a lot, thankfully.
This is absolutely amazing.
Suppose you have a batch with a bunch of new startups that have this intense love for the products, and you're trying to predict which ones are going to be breakout successes. Beyond this sort of marker of intense love, are there some things some rules of thumb that you use?
The rules of thumb are always difficult for predicting that because the companies that go on to do something really great tend to do something really new as well. And so it's very difficult to say here, beyond that and a few other sort of shared traits which I can talk about, there's usually some really new insight that would have failed the old tests when you get really specific into you need to see this growth rate or this engagement rate or this kind of a monopoly in the market. So that is challenging. But the things generally that I think I like to see to predict what's going to be a big breakout, one is obviously users of product love. Another is obviously how good the founders are around the traits that we talked about just a minute ago. Another is how quickly the market is growing. You know, the question that investors usually ask is, how big is your market? I think this is a terrible question. You would never ask a startup how big is your current revenue and make your investment decision based off of that. You'd want to know how it's going to grow. And the same thing for markets. The markets that are best for startups are markets that are small today and going to grow explosively over the next 10 years. And very few investors ask this question. But what we like are markets like that. And so we'd like to see a market that is maybe small today, but growing very quickly. And then the fourth thing that is not perfectly predictive but pretty good is, has the company already captured a significant part of some small market? So Airbnb, by the end of YC, had captured a significant amount of pre-existing apartment renters in New York City. Stripe had captured nearly 100% of YC companies in their current batch already that wanted to process payments. And so we look for something like that, but you don't always see it.
Great. We have time for one more question. Vinod. Yeah.
You've talked about judging founders. Question about judging the kinds of teams founders would build. Comment on that.
Well, so before I took over Y Combinator, I was an investor. And I tried to learn the kind of non-obvious signals that I could look at that other investors didn't. And judging the kind of team a founder would build is somewhat hard. I never figured out how to do that perfectly, although I'll talk a little bit about how I identify good recruiters. But the thing I learned how to do that most investors don't do was to meet the existing team the founder had hired. And so I got to the point where I wouldn't make a large investment without going in and meeting all of the founder's direct reports. And this was incredibly high signal. And I think something that once I figured that out, it was crazy to me other investors don't do that. But it's true that, you know, I think, Vinod, this comes from you, that the team you build is the company you build. And so go meet the team. And this was probably the most effective, non-obvious thing I did as an investor. And there were plenty of times where it made me either invest or not invest when I was earlier planning the opposite. In terms of judging the founder's ability to recruit, the best hack I thought I ever figured out for that is how tempted I was to go join that company after spending time with them. Because the founders that are sort of naturally great recruiters just leave everyone they ever meet with a feeling that they should go join that company in any context.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.